This was not just a war of trenches and cannon fire. It wasn't just about bayonets or barbed wire. World War I was actually a massive financial war. A war fought in gold reserves, bond markets, central banks, and the secret offices of financiers who never set foot on the battlefield. Soldiers paid the price with their blood, yes. But bankers and governments? They were calculating balance sheets. And what they did in those years didn't just determine who won the war. It rewired the global financial system so thoroughly that the system still traps you today. If you think the war was only about politicians and armies, think again. World War I proved one thing very clearly to us. Money is a weapon, and one of the deadliest weapons ever invented. Let's go to 1914. Europe was already like a bomb ready to explode. Everyone was enemies. Everyone was paranoid. But underneath those speeches of glory, fame, and empire lay a very simple financial truth. You couldn't wage a war this big unless you had an unimaginable amount of money. And the bitter truth was this: when leaders chose war, they actually chose debt. Every state sending soldiers to the front was actually pushing its people under an economic burden. The funny part is, at the start of the war, most governments thought it would be over by Christmas. They said, "We'll pay the old-fashioned way, a little gold, a little debt, a little public donation, done and dusted." But this dream only lasted a few weeks. The war was burning through money at a speed no one could have predicted. Let's be honest. In the summer of 1914, Europe's financial system was still tied to the gold standard, meaning states promised to give the corresponding gold to anyone who brought in their paper money. This gave money trust, but tied the government's hands, because gold was limited. You couldn't just print money as you pleased without losing people's trust. But when millions of men were conscripted and factories started producing weapons, costs spiraled out of control. The math was ruthless. The gold wouldn't be enough. So governments changed the rules of the game. One by one, they abandoned the gold standard. They were essentially silently admitting to their citizens, "Now this money is just a piece of paper based on your faith in the state." And that moment, the moment money was severed from gold, was one of the biggest breaking points in modern history. It revealed how fragile so-called wealth really was. Once governments tasted that freedom of printing unbacked money, they never went back to the old ways. The financial war was really heating up now. Germany was isolated from the world, under blockade at sea. Its only choice was to borrow from its own people. They played the patriotism card. Posters showed hero soldiers sacrificing families. They told the public, "Bring your savings, we will pay you back when we win the war." Germany collected massive amounts this way, but it was a Ponzi scheme built entirely on hope. When defeat arrived, those bonds became trash. Millions of Germans watched their life savings evaporate. That disappointment and rage fed the toxic soil where extremism, Nazism, would later be born. Economic history always leaves scars behind. Britain had a massive advantage. London was the world's financial center. But even they soon became in need of global credit. And most importantly, they turned their faces to America. In 1914, America was neutral, but American bankers had already smelled the opportunity. Giants like J.P. Morgan became the financial lifeline of Britain and France. When America officially entered the war in 1917, Wall Street had already been financing the Allies for years. This wasn't charity, this was power. American bankers made fortunes, and the U.S. emerged from the war a completely different country. No longer a debtor, but a creditor. Not a follower, but a leader. If you wonder how the 20th century became the American century, look for the answer not on battlefields, but in those ledgers. France shared a similar fate, borrowing from both its own people and America. These debts would be the main source of the tension shaping politics post-war. In Russia, the situation was a total disaster. The economy collapsed, the ruble turned to dust, inflation exploded. The collapse of the czarist regime wasn't just about bad generals. It was about a bankrupt system. When the money ran out, the regime ended too. At the end of the war, the numbers were terrifying. The Allies had spent $140 billion, the Central Powers $60 billion. Such sums had never been seen in the world before. The result? Mountains of debt and a collapsed financial order. Inflation spread everywhere. Think of those days in Germany when billions of marks were paid to buy a loaf of bread. And who paid the price? Ordinary people. Workers, small savers. The rich protected themselves by moving money abroad or investing in assets. The lesson was brutal. In a financial war, the small investor always bleeds first. Now pay attention here, because this part is about you today. World War I was the moment governments learned they could finance the impossible by severing money from reality. They discovered they could ignore gold, print money like crazy, and indebt future generations. Sound familiar? Because the script has never changed. From the Great Depression to the 2008 crisis, there are echoes of 1914 in every crisis. When governments or central banks come out and say inflation is temporary, our fundamentals are strong, remember that they were saying the same thing in 1914, and millions of people believed them until the money in their hands turned into toilet paper. When the war ended in 1918, the world had turned into a ruin on balance sheets too. America was now the world's new boss. Europe was in a debt swamp. The war had dethroned London and seated Wall Street there. The dollar had done what no cannon could. But the story doesn't end here, because paying back a war financed by debt is a separate war itself. Britain and France grabbed Germany by the throat to pay their own citizens. You will pay war reparations. The figure they wanted was a fantasy. It was impossible for Germany to pay this. The more they tried to pay, the more their economy sank. Those scenes in 1923 where Germans carried money in wheelbarrows to buy bread weren't a coincidence. They were a result of impossible debts. And this situation created the anger figures like Hitler would use. Meanwhile, Britain tried to fix the pound to its pre-war value to return to the good old days, 1925. This was like trying to force a broken leg to walk without healing it. Result? Unemployment and misery. This policy, defended by names like Winston Churchill, became one of history's biggest economic mistakes. Again, the public paid the price, while elites consoled themselves with the dream, "we saved our reputation." As for America, it didn't know what to do with its new power. They set up a money carousel. America lends to Germany. Germany pays reparations to Britain and France, and they turn around and pay their debts to America. A system that looked like it worked on the surface, but was actually completely rotten. When the Great Depression came, this structure collapsed like a house of cards. That is why WWI isn't just a military history lesson. It is proof of how financial mistakes shape the future. The war showed us this. Propaganda can turn debt into patriotism. Ordinary people can give everything for bonds that will never be repaid. And the real winners of war are usually not those in the trenches, but those sitting at those tables. Let's return to today. When central banks think they solve problems by printing money, when debt ceilings rise every year, when money is created out of nothing with a keystroke, remember 1914. This system is not an accident, it is a design. Through inflation, taxes, and your melting savings, they always find a way to make you pay that price. Real wealth isn't the numbers in the bank or the promises of politicians. Real wealth is knowing what's what, seeing these illusions, and being resilient. This is the only financial freedom history allows you. Long story short, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. That financial playbook written in 1914 is being put in front of us again today with new words, new excuses. But the result is always the same. Those with power protect themselves. Those without knowledge are sacrificed. If you take just one lesson from this story, let it be this. Don't assume money is real just because it's printed, or that the system is solid just because officials say everything is fine. The truth is always hidden in those boring balance sheets, and history is the only teacher that never lies. If what I've told you gave you a different perspective, hit the subscribe button. The answers are all in history. I'm just showing you where to look.